Hello, everyone. How are we today? I am so excited to connect with all of you ladies for my Ask Me Anything topic. So today I am opening the floor to answer all of your questions about what it's like to be a project manager. So I had a handful of questions submitted to me and I wanted to go ahead and go through some of those questions with all of you. And then I will open the floor. So if there are any questions that you submit into the chat, I would be happy to answer them and just have a discussion and answer all of your burning questions about what it's like to be a project manager. So a little bit about me. I have been a project manager now for over a decade, and I have worked primarily in software and tech. And I have worked for a variety of companies in various industries all over the US and even organizations that are global. So I have participated in projects where there were tens of thousands of people impacted, and I was in the driver's seat, making sure that everyone got communicated to and that everybody knew their marching orders as we went through the rollout. I have been formally trained as a project manager and I have been a practitioner. So I have a lot of different perspectives to offer. And one thing that I found super valuable when I was going into project management was being able to ask questions to somebody who knew more than me for me to decide if it was the right path or for me to just learn something about what it was like for that person to be in that kind of role. And that was so extremely valuable to me. So I figure why not pass along that value back to you and open up the floor and answer any questions you have about what it's like to be a project manager. So if you are here with me live, say hi in the comments and drop any questions that you want me to answer. If you're checking out the replay, say hello as well. Let me know if you like this kind of topic. And I'm going to go ahead and dive into our first topic here. So one of the first questions that I was asked was how did you land your first project management job? So this is a fantastic question. So I had originally worked as an office manager slash like HR at a doctor's office. And the first role I got when I was making my step into project management was what I call an operations analyst slash project coordinator role. I did both operations and projects. And the way I got into that role, where I didn't have the formal title, but I was managing projects, was leveraging the skills that I had from working in a doctor's office. So we did a project where we set up new software because this is back when electronic medical health records was really popular. So I learned to talk about how I vetted out which tool we were going to use, how I got my staff trained to use the tool, how I worked with the company to implement the tool, and then how we started to use it as a team. And I mapped out the timelines, the trainings, and all of that. So that experience that I had in the doctor's office, that specific project, I was able to use. So when I got an interview at U-Haul, a lot of you are very familiar. I work at their corporate office. I worked at their corporate office here in Arizona. I was able to speak to how I can work with people from different departments, so cross-functional staff, to work towards a common goal, which was to get the software up and running, implemented, and get the staff trained. And I use that as an example to show that even though the environment was different, I was working in a doctor's office versus, working in a big corporate office like U-Haul, the skills that I had were the same. I managed projects in some capacity working at U-Haul, or I'm sorry, working at the doctor's office. even though I never had a formal title, I did what a project manager does. Now, did I do things that were more operational in nature? I absolutely did. But I identified some of the skills I had and I learned to speak on them confidently. And so when I updated my resume and I got the call back to, come in and interview, I knew what key points I was going to touch on in the interview to show and demonstrate that I had this experience. And that's really what landed me this role where I helped onboard new storage facilities that U-Haul partnered with. And then I provided some ongoing support. So that's why it was kind of a project manager role and kind of an operational role. After that was the first time I got my formal project manager title. So I'm going to cover this as well, just because the first role maybe didn't have that title, but still the same skills and still the same type of work. So when I went to this next company where I had the formal title, I did the same thing. I talked about some of the skills that I had. So I was working on projects. I worked on a lot of them at once. So I talked about how I was organized, how I was able to manage my workload for multiple projects. I talked about how I had to communicate how projects were going to my boss and to other teams in the organization. And so I really just learned a lot of the key terms that are used in project management and learned how to communicate them effectively so that I could get my foot in the door and nail the interview. And it really just came down to identifying what those transferable skills are and highlighting those in my resume and in my interview. And I got really good and confident about talking about it so that no matter what kind of questions were thrown my way, I felt good about being able to answer them. And truly, that's what got me the role. And it's got me in a lot of interviews for a lot of really large companies because I continue to use that same concept of IDing my skills and experience and carrying it with me. All right. If you have any other questions, pop them in the chat. I'm going to keep going. So the other question was, when you have a big project, how do you prioritize it? So this is, in a way, very much a personal preference. For me, I like to write things down. So I have a planner. I'll show you. And I will kind of use this planner to write out anything that's important for me to check on. So for me, this is how I keep myself organized the best. So if I have an important project, I will write down like, I need to do these things tomorrow. I also time block my calendar. So I will say like from tomorrow from 10 to 11, I am going to focus on this project. And then in the description of the calendar hold, I'll say like the things that I'm gonna do. So it really depends. Sometimes I write it down, sometimes I do it electronically, but that's like my own personal checklist. And then I use whatever project tool the company is using to keep track of all of the project related activities that I need to do to manage the project itself, because there may be other people in the organization who need to see what's going on. So I will use whatever tool is being leveraged, but for me, yes, I am in the project schedule. That's where I live a lot of the time. There's also a lot of things I have to do behind the scenes. I have to have reminders to communicate with my team, to inform stakeholders of things that are going on, to write status reports, to maybe do some analytics on some reports and how projects are performing. And a lot of those things aren't in my project plan, but they're things that I'm responsible for. And that's when I'll use the time blocking or my to-do list to jot down some of those things that live outside of the project schedule. And for me, if I have that time blocked or have it on my to-do list, I put the most important things that need to be done on either the time blocking or the to-do list. And if my priorities change throughout the day and I need to make a shift, it's easy for me to cross it off and move it to a new day, or to time block another time, another day to focus on that effort. And there may be things that I need to do that are less of a priority. And if I need to shift those to another day, I will. But that's kind of how I take on like something big that I need to focus on that's very important to the organization. I make sure that I make a conscious effort to have time to focus on that. And then I make sure that I'm over communicating everything and documenting things as much as possible. That way I can kind of CYA. And I think that's the biggest thing that you can do in some of those larger projects. Okay, again, if you're joining me live, hello, welcome. This is an Ask Me Anything session. Right now, I am just, I collected some questions that were asked last week, and I'm walking through and answering those now. If you're here with me live, though, pop any of your questions in the chat. I will answer them while we are here on the call. I want to make sure I get all of them answered. But for now, I'm just going to keep going through this list that I compiled of questions that were submitted to me. So the next one is, what tech did you immediately need to know? Anything beyond Excel and Microsoft Word? So I have always been in the tech and software space. It was not by choice. It was like something I fell into and I just stayed in. And I truly do enjoy it. If you're not getting into tech, I think that those two at a minimum are great, and probably PowerPoint as well, for like doing any kind of presentations. I think if you're going to be in tech, those are still the basics that I even use. Sometimes it's in like Google Docs or something like that, or Google Sheets. I primarily use those. Occasionally, there may be a tool that my company uses that's helpful. So a lot of the organizations that I have worked for use Jira. Sometimes it's not my team, but it's like the development team. So if I have them working on something for me, I have visibility into it. So I think knowing your way around Jira can be helpful. But is it required? Absolutely not. I did not know anything about Jira when I got my first job. I don't even think it was around yet. And when I did finally work for a company that had it, like I just learned it when I was there. Like it wasn't a requirement. It's a tool, it's very easy to use. So I don't know, I picked it up along the way. And now I've seen the pattern of almost every organization that I work for use Jira, whether it's my department or not, in some capacity in the organization that I interact with. I always end up in Jira. Beyond that, I think that's it. I mean, even being in tech, there aren't like a lot of tools that like I feel you need to know, because every organization is different. So it's a bonus. What is Jira? Jira is a tool that you can use. It's primarily used that I see in development, but it can be used to manage projects. You can have like Kanban boards. So what work is in progress, to do, in progress, complete. You can also have different workflows in there. So like right now at the company I work with, and the last few companies I've worked for, our development team uses it to prioritize their sprints, and because they use Agile, and they will use it to track like bugs, system bugs, and track like product requests. So oftentimes, because I'm a project manager, my customer may have a bug or may have a product request. And so I may have to work with development, and I may be interested to know what the status is of one of those. So I often have to know my way around it at a high level. I've used it in my business personally. to help manage some of the work that, me and my team do. So it's a great tool, and there's a lot of other components to it that you can add, like documentation and such. So it's a really good one to know. And I would say a lot of companies, regardless of whether they're in tech, use it. But I think if you don't know it, it's not going to prohibit you from getting your foot in the door, because it's a very easy tool to learn. Along with that, there was a question about whether organizations use Microsoft Project. It's funny because I was formally trained. I have an undergrad and a graduate degree in business with a focus in project management. And everything we learned was in Microsoft Project. I'm not a fan of it, but I like some of the concepts in it. And I find that a lot of other tools out there mimic some of that to a degree. But I would say I have never worked for a company that primarily used Microsoft Project. Most of the time we use some other tool. However, I have worked for companies who had customers that use Microsoft Project. So I had to use it because my customers used it. And so while the organization I worked for used a different tool, we used Smartsheets, I would have to oftentimes update Microsoft Project or give them an extract of Smartsheets and give it to the customer to import into Microsoft Project. They're very similar tools, but they also have their own strengths and weaknesses. So I would say I haven't had to use it as a requirement for any company I've worked for, but because I know it, I've been able to help our customers who do use it and oftentimes require us to. So it's good to know a lot of the premise behind it, but I don't see it widely used, at least in the over a decade or so that I've been in the field. A lot of people get intimidated by that one, and it can be very complex in a lot of ways. So it's kind of nice that there's some other tools out there that get the job done and have a lot of similarities, but they're a lot more user-friendly than Microsoft Project, because that can just be a lot. Okay, let's see what the next question is. What's your view on getting other certs? A+, Net+, security? Are those like development or technical certs? I think those are like very tech. Most of the positions I've been looking at want 3 years of IT experience. When they say IT experience, are they talking about those? Excuse me. I mean, I see the PMP cert a lot, and I see the Scrum cert. That's it. All these other ones are very like focused and technical. Excuse me, I'm a little sick. So I haven't seen them personally. If you see a job that asks you like 3 years IT experience, like I'm curious to know what that means, because these certs are like very technical development and networking. And for the standard project manager role, those wouldn't be required. I hope that helps. If you're on the call or on the live stream, feel free to add additional context in the chat for me to answer. All right. Another question I got was Agile versus Waterfall. Can you summarize what these mean in real life? Yeah. So Agile is some methodology that is a lot more flexible and accepts change. So it puts less focus on process, on documentation, and it's more focused on the people and getting small wins throughout the project. Whereas Waterfall is let's plan something, let's follow the plan to a T, let's make it harder to make changes unless we go through formal process. It's more formal, I would say. So in the real world, you see this formality of waterfall. Excuse me. You see this formality more in construction projects where you have to follow everything to a T, where you can't get small wins along the way. You see agile more in like software and tech, where you can start to deliver little wins along the way and be able to build upon that and have flexibility for change in requirements as you go. So it really just depends on the organization, the environment, the type of project, and which one makes the most sense based on the situation. They both have their pros and cons. So there's not one that's, right or wrong, I would say. All right, if you're here with me live, I am through the last of the questions that I received in advance of the call. Drop any other questions you have for me that you'd like me to answer. Well, I'm live. If you're here for the replay and you have any questions that you'd like me to answer, you can feel free to drop them in the comments. I'd be happy to answer them. I am a completely open book on this topic, so I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. So far, we've covered topics around landing your first job, prioritizing large projects, knowing what tech to use, what certifications to get, and we've talked a little bit about methodologies. Are there any other questions that I can answer for you ladies before we conclude the day in a life Ask Me Anything? We'll go ahead and just refresh the live. And if we don't have any, excuse me. All right, I do not see anything. I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to conclude this live stream. Thank you so much for your time, and I will talk to you all later.